Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Really good to be here with you.
I'm excited for our conversation and I'm excited about your book and what you're up to in the world. And I would love to hear about what brought you to this time and place with writing a book, with how you're showing up in the world.
Mm. Well, first of all, thanks for taking the time to read the book. Just it's always an honor when someone makes space to listen and learn from your story. So I'm glad to be here. I actually this didn't start as a book. It started as a one-time only one-man show that I performed that was called Mr. Mystical. Um, and that show I did on my 39th birthday a few years ago, and it was on the heels of a 5, 6 year season of my life in which I would just say it was a descent into the depths of my soul, like a deep inner journey, a journey of healing, but that came with a lot of difficulty and challenges along the way. And so when I was emerging from that season, I was invited sort of by a coach or guide to find a way to express that and share what I had discovered. So the one man show was the thing. And only one night, I will just say, because I did it in front of my friends at a small theater in Seattle. Because part of what I had worked through on this journey was learning to let go of my attachments to outcomes. And I was always trying to make something out of something rather than just like being in it and enjoying and being present to the creative process. So all that is to say, perform Mr. Mystical and then put it away. But about 6 months later, it was during the pandemic, 6 to 9 months later, it came back up and was kind of the stories were telling me like, hey, there's more to share here. So out of that, after about a year and a half, came The Way Home.
And what are you so passionate about when it comes to this topic?
Well, I would say that if I kind of trace my vocational path in a way, so I was an ordained minister in my former life. I talk a little bit about that in the book. Um, but really there's this through line through everything I've done. I teach meditation and coach now, but there's always this sense of calling to, I mean, first personally, there's always been a conversation I've been in with the something more, with the divine, with God, um, and that's animated my life. And what I've always felt kind of called into through that is this passion to help others wake up. So to wake up to their fullest lives. So actually the church I started many years ago is called, still is called Awake Church. And so this idea of waking up to the fullness of who we are, to the gift of life, to um, the relationships we're in, to the moment that we're in all the time. So that's I'm bring you know the that's in the book. It's this idea to help people wake up to their wholeness, to discover their inner wholeness and live out of that place above all.
And how did you learn that process for yourself?
Yeah, I think I one of the ironic things in sort of a tragic sense is that for, it's been almost 2 decades that I've been, I'd say, in this, expressing this calling of helping people wake up and trying to do that in various ways. And the irony being that for a good chunk of it, say about a decade or so, there was a way in which I um, was falling asleep even as I was helping other people wake up. So even as I was helping other people become more whole, there were parts of myself that I wasn't tending to, wounds and scars and pain and things like that that led to burnout and sort of distance in relationship and being checked out of my own life. So there was a kind of wake up call moment that happened, and I talk about this in the book, but it's kind of where things begin, where one morning I was out for a run and this inner voice says to me as I'm charging up this hill in the rain in Seattle, um, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. And right away I knew that wasn't like about my heart rate, right? It was a wake up call. It was saying that like the ways I was moving through the world simply weren't going to work anymore, that I needed to open myself up and really go inward and do the hard work of figuring out who I am and why I'm here. So, um, the book then talks about, 5, 6 years of going on that deep journey, but, um, at that phase of my life, yeah, that's the way that I kind of stumbled upon or stumbled back into the journey.
So many of my listeners are like us, where they have gone on these journeys and they've uncovered aspects of themselves that they didn't even know were there. And they feel this sense of waking up to this whole new possibility. And then they start thinking about, well, how can I share this with others? And how can I make a difference with what I've learned? And yet it's so ethereal. It's so intertwined in just, the
Mhm.
stories, the narratives inside of our head, or and sometimes even difficult to voice because
Mm,
only a certain portion of the people around us are going to even be ready for those conversations. And so I guess what I'm getting to is how does one even begin to think, you in this case, that
mhm.
you could share these things that are going on
Yeah.
inside of you in a way that would be meaningful to others?
Yeah, I mean, that's the huge challenge. I just came across a quote from Joseph Campbell, who I interact with his work a bit in my book, but he says, when you return from this journey of self-discovery, he says you often find that you are playing the idiot before a jury of sober eyes. I thought, wow, that is what it feels like sometimes. So how do you take what is inexpressible and express it? How do you take the experience you have that in a sense is uncontainable and figure out what a container is to deliver it to the world? So, yeah, what you're naming, it's very much a true reality was for me and it's for others to figure out how do I take um, this experience and bring it back to the world. I think it's always an act of translation. So, um, and it's translated, I think our minds, and for me, for the longest time, I always went to, how do I what does this mean for my job? Right? And I think that's an amazing gift when your sense of vocation or calling, when there's major overlap with the work you do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that is incredible. And yet, that's not always where it begins. And so the key is to not just limit this sense of calling, this vocation, the gift you're bringing back from the journey, not just limiting it to the work you do, but also saying, guess what? This is true for um, the relationships I'm in. So there's going to be different ways I'm called to share in these relationships, or it might be in a broader community. It might be in a project, like what I shared, for example, that Mr. Mystical show that led to the book. There was something of that was a way of giving my gift back to the community. Um, and it wasn't for everyone, right? It's not for everyone, but a project can help in a small, tangible way start to help us start to take steps towards broader or bigger expressions of the vocation. And then the last thing I would say is it's also just in a moment. It's a moment to moment thing. So um, there's a whole assortment of ways that we can share or bring back what we've discovered. And it's always, I think, really important to start small and start with what's in front of you as opposed to looking for the big, grandiose thing. Because if we are just going after the big thing, then I think we might lose that sense of connection with the thing that is ours to share.
Hmm. Yeah, I love the idea that we've got to find this container, and can we make it relevant to the lives that we're living? The other component I think you were talking about, but I'll just kind of give voice to it, is the power of storytelling. Because what I found is when we teach these concepts that are very ethereal, it's very, very easy for them to come across as telling people what to do or how
Mm,
to think or how to be. And as a teacher for many years, I've learned that when we are in that role of like, I know it and I'm going to teach you, most people don't get take much away from that.
mm, mhm,
However, if we can bring people into the stories of our lives and our experiences and really tune it into this I am presence, like I was struggling with this, I these are these very vulnerable experiences that I had to go through,
mm,
then it opens people up to being like, oh, I also feel those same vulnerabilities, but I haven't heard anyone talk about it before. So now I'm really interested in what you're sharing
Mm,
because maybe what you're about to say next is going to actually be like food for my soul. Have
yes.
you found that?
Yeah, I mean, and even that process of the storytelling piece, it takes patience. I think one of the things I discovered from my journey that's typical for a lot of people that's important to remember is, especially when you're fresh off the journey before you begin your next one, right? We were talking about that how earlier, you and I before this, it's like it begins again, right? Um, but when we get back, it's important, like we're gonna want to share. I want to tell everyone about it. I want to tell everyone about the stories the things I've gone through. Um, Sometimes you'll be before people. They might be some of the people that that known you the longest, and they'll be like, okay, that's nice. Can we just like watch this show now, right? Like not everyone is ready to hear from you. So, um, Jesus has this line where he says, he says, "Don't cast your pearls before swine." It's like a pretty harsh comment, but part of it is like if you have this treasure, you've recovered a treasure, you have to be discerning about the places in which you share that. And so, that means it's not going to be with everyone and it's not going to be right away. So, finding other places, maybe where people are starting to, who are already sharing stories and they're open to it, they might also be curious to hear yours. So that's one great context. I think the other thing to remember is maybe the most powerful thing we can do before we think about speaking something is to embody it. So live your life in such a way that people are curious about the stories that you've lived through. Live your life in such a way that they inquire and say, "Hey, like something's different about you." Or, "Wow, I see you moving through the world with such courage right now." Or, "It really feels like you've like done some deep work and have like experienced healing from X, Y, or Z." Live your life in that kind of way where people approach you and invite you to share your story. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be a huge platform on like social media right away. But if you've discovered on the journey that like the gift you bring is even that it just impacts one person, like, and I know that's sort of cliche, like, I think often if you've gone on the journey, you realize, no, actually that's where it starts and that's what matters. So, yeah, that piece of embodiment feels really critical before going immediately to telling someone. We got to show someone.
Hmm. Wholeheartedly agree with that. Just like me, you include aspects of the hero's journey in your book. Why was that so important to help the reader take more away from
Mm,
from reading your book?
mm, I love that question. Um, you've probably had this with your book too. Some people might say be drawn to mindful or millionaire or scarcity or other words in your subtitle or whatever it is. Um, like my subtitle, The Way Home is pretty general, but it's interesting. Some people are like, oh, your book's about midlife because that's there. Oh, discovery. That sounds amazing. Or hero's journey or wholeness, right? So, um, the hero's journey, it's definitely woven throughout my book. So that's why it's in the title. And yes, it's also something that it's got some cultural currency. People are familiar with it. They've heard about it. Um, I did not set out on a journey with a Joseph Campbell book in my hand and say, now, how do I do step whatever? By the way, he's got like 17 steps in his hero's journey. Mine is 10. Um, but like what I noticed is after I underwent this soulful experience and got my heart back as I talk about it in the book, I was reading Joseph Campbell's stuff and I was like, this lines up exactly with what I experienced. Now I put some of my own language to it. But in terms of, this question of why is that helpful for people? I think, yeah, to start with something that people can relate to or they've heard about, whether it's in a Star Wars movie or some other place, they've heard this term. Um, but I also realize that a lot of maybe you found this too, a lot of the resources out there in terms of the hero's journey, they're pretty thick and some of them are pretty obtuse and not relatable to ordinary everyday lives. So I wanted to do that in my interaction with that pattern of the hero's journey. Um, but the other thing is, I think there's a bit of a way, and I say this playfully because this image is from like a mythical context, but or, this idea I kind of use the hero's journey as like a Trojan horse. So the hero's journey, when you say heroic, that attracts a certain person. What kind of person? I think often, from my experience, would be like someone who's pretty driven, pretty ambitious, has big, lofty goals for their life. The kind of person that I was when, guess what? I lost my heart, when I crashed and burned out, and when I was ended up kind of far from myself. And so I think using this language of the hero's journey, there's also a way in which it gets it in front of people who may need to hear it the most. In terms of the way that I deliver it and talk about it, this letting go, um, falling into the unknown, facing your death, like these things that are actually pretty vulnerable and uncomfortable that we don't, if you're an ambitious type of person, you're not always associating with uh, this journey to being a hero.
So you're getting into like, who is this book written for? And I'd love it if you could expand. Like, I think that people are very interesting in
Mhm.
that they need an impetus, right, to pick up the book. They need often a challenge, a difficulty, a struggle that they're not able to solve on their own. And at least this is how I
Mhm.
look at books.
Mhm.
And maybe that's how my listeners are too. Like, what is this going to do for me? How is this going to help me? And I'm curious what you would say to that about your book.
Yeah, I would say that, um, the first line of the book is, there are a million ways to lose your heart. There are a million ways to lose your heart. And eventually I say there's only one way to get it back. And I talk about this pattern and, leaving the familiar, falling into the unknown. Those things have to happen before rising to wholeness. Um, but one of the reasons I say there are a million ways to lose your heart is because, I think in our culture we like the big stories. What I mean is we love like actually the crash and burn story, and then someone like a phoenix rising from the ashes like comes back. Whether that's an athlete, someone who's experienced financial ruin and then like built another business, um, we love, or someone who's come from a really traumatic, difficult background and has like made their way in the world. We love those stories. Those are beautiful stories. Those are powerful stories. There's also a way in which not everyone can relate to them. The problem, but we think we can, and we like to read them, and then so what ends up happening, and this is what I think is a problem, we start to just kinda live vicariously through the stories of others. This, like, down and up and, falling and rising, instead of saying, "Hey, I might not have, um, as dramatic or as traumatic of a story, and yet, there's a way that I can, if I name it and if I'm honest right now, there's a way that I feel disconnected from who I really am. There's a way that I feel like I am underliving my life, and there's more out there for me. My life might look very ordinary. It's not totally falling apart. Guess what? I'm, sending out a holiday card and I'm smiling. I'm on the sidelines at my kid's soccer game. I'm, contributing at work in a meaningful way. And yet, there's a layer within us that says, oh, there's something more here. And so, what would it look like then to begin that journey, even if we don't know what we're leaving behind or what we're moving towards? And so really that's, my book is like a tool and a resource to help people, to nudge them towards that and to get them paying attention to those whispers that have been, coming at them before they get too loud, because when they get really loud, um, that's often where it becomes even a lot more painful. The journey is going to be painful either way, but there's ways that we can anticipate the invitation into a deeper, fuller life before something like hits us up on the side of the head.
Mm, yeah, I love how you describe that because I would say that everyone has a bit of that, like maybe it's conscious, maybe it's not conscious. But if you ask and you start digging, which I love to ask lots of questions to people to get them thinking, it doesn't take too long before it's like, yeah, actually, if I was honest with myself, I'm not sure about this thing, or I know that I want so much more from my life, but I and it's not more stuff, it's not more activities, it's not more busyness. So
Mhm.
there's this void that I don't totally understand. And I do see how the way that you've crafted your book is offering people a way of living through your own experiences and then also engaging in this process of inquiry for themselves to find their own answers. I really enjoyed the gentleness of the
Mm.
approach and the kindness that the reader feels when they're going through this. I was telling you before we started, I had just finished a retreat, and I've done a couple of retreats back to back. And what you just described is probably the same exact reason why somebody comes on a retreat. Is it's like there's something more, but I don't know how to reach it. I don't know how to access it. And what a joy it would be if it was actually all within me, like that I had
Mhm.
all the resources already inside of me, that
Mm.
just by having those be awakened, that I could, leave this retreat or leave this book a changed person
Mm.
because of the perspective that I've gained about this wisdom within.
Mm. Mm. It's so beautiful. Yeah, and I agree. I think um, it is all within. And as soon as we begin, like even stepping out, like in the uncertainty, it's like, what actually am I even working through, right? Like we can name all the big things. Like I didn't like suddenly commit a crime. I'm not an alcoholic. I didn't just get divorced. I didn't just like have a major illness. Now, all those things, they often, this is why you see people growing up and maturing a lot of times who go through those things, right? Not everyone, but a lot of people see those as their opportunity for transformation. But the thing is, you don't have to wait for the rock bottom moment. But if you sense even at a small level, like some of these folks on the retreat you were leading, like that there is something more, it's everything to just acknowledge that and then start to listen, which I really think is the first step, is finding ways, going on a retreat, journaling, seeing a spiritual director or therapist, like whatever the thing might be, to just open up more space to allow what's under the surface to start to emerge. And as you do this, and I've lived this, I'm sure you've lived this. This is what Campbell talks about in his book on the hero's journey. He talks about how like allies will come your way. Like you will find in a sense that like nature or the divine is conspiring with you to bring about this change. And so while you might feel entirely alone at the beginning, those things will start coming your way. And, I talk about mystical moments. Like you'll have these moments. Just the right thing at the right time will be said to you. Just the right book will be mentioned to you. You'll see something, or you'll hear something, or you have a dream, and they'll let you know. They won't tell you the whole path. They'll just let you know the next right step. And so before you know it, and guess what? It might take a long time. It could be a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is. You'll suddenly be like, wow, I didn't realize this was the stuff that I needed to let go of. I had no idea when I started, but the journey made it known to me. So yeah, that's where just the importance of like the next right thing. That's where it all begins.
Mhm. Yeah. 25 years of doing this work, what amazes me is that there is always opportunity to start again, to begin a new journey. And I was sharing, this past year has been a whole new journey of becoming empty nesters. And
Mm.
like, what does that mean in my life in the context of how I spend my time and what's important to me now based on all the changes that have happened, and how can I take my gifts and serve people in an even more meaningful way than what I've done before. And that may, in my case, require reinventing much of what had
Mm.
been created before. So this idea of finding our way home is profound. If you could say the full name of the book, and where people can get it and what's the next step, that would be beautiful.
All right, I will. The book is called The Way Home: Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife. And it's published by St. Martin's Essentials. And you can find it by looking at Macmillan Book's site, but the easiest place is just by going to thewayhomebook.com. That'll take you to my website where you can order the book. It'll give you options on Amazon or Target or some local bookstores or whatever. So thewayhomebook.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ben, so much for this conversation today.
Lisa, such a gift to be with you. I really appreciate your curiosity and fantastic questions. This was really fun.
All the links from this episode can be found at mindfulmillionairebook.com, where you'll also get access to free gifts and my book, The Mindful Millionaire. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with your friends and family. Thanks for tuning in to elevate your financial consciousness. To connect with me directly and other like-minded souls and discuss today's episode, be sure to join us on Facebook inside the Mindful Millionaire community. Just type Mindful Millionaire Community into your Facebook search bar and click Join Group. You'll answer 3 quick questions and then you can join our conversations about all things money and mindfulness. Can't wait to meet you there.